I've saved the best sort of umbrella topic for last, Rahul, and that is to do with exemptions. Now, that has been like the pet sort of ask of all civil rights activists that have safeguards, have an oversight mechanism, don't have sweeping, state exemptions. Not only state exemptions in this bill, we also have the government getting empowered to notify specific data fiduciaries, uh, maybe even in the private sector, where these very, let's say, onerous obligations, if even were to see it, will not become applicable. There are situations where, let's say, where there is investigation, or where there is, a prosecution, or for prevention of even an offense, uh, the provisions of the law will not get applicable. I mean, does it not read wide to you?
No, look, I mean, I think okay. So let me place it. Let me place it in as charitable a light as I can. The fact that the law does
My
not.
ask is not charitable at all of you. Just please go ahead.
I'm not being charitable to you. I know the voices ranged against me, and most of the voices ranged against me are civil liberties, and so I completely see where they're coming from, because if you're a civil liberties, civil rights lawyer, essentially what you're doing is you're taking the government to task. But when you're taking the government to task, you have many weapons, many arrows in your quiver, starting with the Constitution. Nothing this law does or does not do is going to erode the rights that you have in the Constitution. Subsequently, you have Puttaswamy. The fact that you have an exemption or not, Puttaswamy is going to ensure that you can actually, do what Puttaswamy allows you to do. But I don't want to go down that path. I want to talk about the way in which this law and the exemptions that we have here, and just the whole history of exemptions in all the laws that have come, drafts that have come up to now, have evolved. Justice Sri Krishna's draft had exemptions. Those exemptions were panned because everyone says, "Oh my goodness me, we're giving so many exemptions." So then, when the next version, the 2019 draft, came, that actually had, what in 21 became Section 35, which was not just an exemption. It basically said the entire act does not apply to certain types of agencies. And when everyone saw that, they said, look, let's go back to Justice Sri Krishna. That was not as bad as this is. And now we've effectively gone back to Justice Sri Krishna's version, where we've got a provision where there are exemptions. The exemptions apply essentially what they do is they say certain provisions of this act will not apply to certain types of instances. There is no blanket exemption to agencies. Now, this, if you want to look at the global standard, I have studied maybe 100 different data protection laws around the world. I don't want to talk about all of them, but if you look at GDPR, Article 23 of GDPR, and you compare the provisions of Article 23 to the provisions of Section 18 of this law, you will find parallels between all of those provisions. Now, are the exact sections that GDPR exempts also exempted? Maybe not. Maybe there's more. Maybe there's less. But the concept of an exemption in a data protection law for things like, the enforcement of rights, prosecution of offenses, this is standard. Every data protection law has an exemption. To think that a data protection law would not have an exemption is daft. There is no law in the country that will not.
I think Rahul arguing that it shouldn't have any protect. I mean, even like you said, Justice Sri Krishna also said that you need state exemption. Right. But what you also need in the parent legislation is some sort of an oversight mechanism or safeguards to say, hey, look, when you're seeking this exemption, there is a judicial oversight of it. None of that is there in this bill.
Well, who said we need a judicial oversight of it? You always have a judicial oversight. Every time you do something, lawyers will be beating down the doors of the Supreme Court to say this needs to be struck down. So that is judicial oversight. Now, do you want to create a new judicial entity whose sole job is to sit on every regulation that the central government does under data protection? I don't see us doing this in any other type of legislation.
But I mean, here at the heart of it is the data principle, and sort of the scale of this legislation in terms of who it affects is massive. So would you not want, when an enforcement agency decides to collect data, would you not want, and even in the criminal jurisprudence, would you not want that enforcement agency to have any oversight?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think there are oversight and the guidelines that the central government has to follow when they are taking these exemptions have been laid down in the Supreme Court when the Puttaswamy judgment interpreted the fundamental rights. Those guidelines cannot be deviated from by the central government. If they do,
Then why
they
hesitate
will
to
be
put
held
it
up.
in the law?
I don't see what the point is putting it in the law when these rights exist. And even if you put it in the law, right? Even if we say that, your remedy is ultimately going to be back in the Supreme Court, because having said that they will do A, B, C, if they don't do it, there's nothing you can do. You basically have to go to the court. And so my point is not to minimize this. My point is just to say, one, exemptions exist in every law. To now fight over the exact language, do we have reasonable, the word reasonable here or not? Doesn't matter if you have reasonable or not, because you have to act reasonably. That's what the Supreme Court says you have to do. Now, if I say I will act reasonably, and actually I didn't act reasonably, you have a remedy. If I don't say I should act reasonably and I don't act reasonably, you still have a remedy. There is nothing that is being harmed by the fact that the word reasonable is not in this legislation. You may say that it points to intent. Okay, maybe it does point to intent, but then actually don't catch them on this imagination that they have this intent. The first time the government does something wrong, go after them.